Backyard Green Films is proud to present this episode of Agri-Culture with your host, Alara Bowman. Alara and her husband Rick travel throughout the land in their teardrop trailer that they have nicknamed Maggie, bringing you stories about their travels and the people they meet. They visit farmers, ranchers, and just about anyone who loves putting their hands in the dirt or their feet in stirrups. For the past 3 years, they have been filming a documentary about heritage breed animals entitled The Holstein Dilemma, Heritage Breeds, and the Need for Biodiversity. In those travels, they have gotten to meet some very interesting people. Here's one of those interviews.
Hi, this is Alara. So here's the skinny on this week's podcast. We managed to catch the last day of the Heirloom Expo in Santa Rosa, California. And even though that was 3 days ago, my feet still hurt. Walk my little tootsies off. It was worth the pain though, as not only did we talk to at least 10 different interesting people and eat some good food, but we got to see the giant pumpkin growing contest in the Great Tower of Squash. Just look up Heirloom Expo and Tower of Squash if you want an image to go with that phrase, if you need one. So, coming from a hotel room in Northern California, here are the guests for today's podcast. Bob Quinn from Big Sandy Organics, home of Cracklin' Kamut. He apparently has some seriously fantastic genetics in his family, as his daughter and his teenage granddaughter were manning the booth, and they were pretty hard to tell apart. More than one hopeful-looking farm boy stopped by Big Sandy Organics when we were there. Brilliant marketing again, Bob. Emily from Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds came by the booth, and she and Bob had a great discussion about heirloom seeds and how fulfilling farming can be. We were especially grateful to catch her for a few, and I believe Baker Creek kind of started the whole Heirloom Expo thing, so I'm sure she was really busy that day. And I'm also grateful because the next time I order $100 worth of seeds from them, I get to tell Rick that I think it was necessary for business promotion. Ha! We met Kathleen from Mama Grows and talked all things rabbit for about 15 minutes. I have to admit that the rabbit thing was a bit of an education. I think that this is one animal that might have a place in a sustainable meat future, as Kathleen seemed to have a use for every bit of the animals she raises. I can't argue with the practicality of that, no matter how much the fuzzy cute thing keeps throwing me. Hudson Valley Seed Company. We're going to New York to do post-production on the film next month, and we have decided that it is absolutely necessary to try to pry some more seed stories out of them. I won't say much more now, but let's just say that if Rick wants to do a new series on seeds and history and culture and art, Hudson Valley Seed Company is the place we want to start. We met Joseph Lofthouse, a sustenance farmer in Paradise, Utah. He was there to speak as an advocate for food freedom and locally adapted seeds. Food freedom. Think about that for a minute. We brought you a quick snippet from one of the food vendors. Now, I'm not one that usually cares for outside-of-the-box food, so please believe me when I tell you that, in a very positive way, I would never have known that this was healthy food when I tasted it. It was delicious. And the last one we're bringing you is Harvest and Mill Organic Clothing. What that means for some of us is cotton. No chemicals, no nastiness, just pure, unadulterated, soft, warm, clean cotton. I will admit I fondled the socks a bit. Rick finally had to make me leave. So as you can see, we had quite a day there. In a future podcast, we'll bring you more of the sights and sounds from the Heirloom Expo, like our discussion with Tom Watkins from Murray McMurray Hatchery. Tom is well acquainted with John Metzer of Metzer Farms and Tom Whiting of Whiting Farms, two of our previous interviews, and it was a delightfully lively discussion. I told this Tom that I felt that a visit to Iowa was necessary to fully understand his perspective, and he jumped right in to invite us out there. I see a few more feathers and a free exotic chick in our future. All of you Murray McMurray people will get that last one. We also got to see a panel discussion on protecting native seeds with 4 people who understand the value of heirlooms. We'll probably bring that one to you in its entirety, as it was really pretty interesting. We're also going to hope to stop by to pester one of the panelists, Sephra Alexandra, the seed huntress, when we're on the East Coast next month. On a last note, we do want to tell you that Sebastopol, California, 15 minutes west of Santa Rosa, was one of the more lovely stays we've had in our travels. We had a delicious vegan meal at Slice of Life Cafe. I had baked ziti. Our lodging was a wonderfully peaceful stay at Amy's local B&B. And I had organic French roast coffee and fresh muffins at my front door, and I got to wake up with chickens talking to each other quietly in the backyard. I also had about 47 new ideas for rainwater collection and distribution to try at our house. The night before we left, we also had a phenomenal ramen at a sustainable restaurant called Ramen Gaijin. It was absolutely to die for. And I didn't think I was much of a ramen girl. We had a truly nice waitress who I'm hoping Rick tipped really well because we're going back if I have to make up a reason to drive up there. And I have to mention that the town has the most interesting art everywhere. It's kind of like an artistic hippie throwback place with a little bit of sophistication and some beautiful wineries hither and yon. All this, and of course our friends from Cleary Farms. We'll be back soon, I'm sure of it.
And it's all interrelated, and small farmers are having a really hard time. So we've talked to farmers that do grains and seeds.
Yeah, so now we're heirloom. They went from heirloom animals to heirloom seeds.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yes. And so we've expanded our content a little bit because there's all these great stories out there, and we got to talk to him in
It's my honor.
Yeah, it's awesome how everybody has their own little niche, but it all comes together.
Yep.
It does.
So
It does.
Really cool.
It's
all
like a
very
community.
important. Yeah, exactly.
It is, and I don't think people understand how under fire the farming system is now.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
if you look at the chemical experiment that's now having many wheels coming off the bus,
Yes.
those
Yes.
folks are really looking for alternatives.
Yeah.
And heirloom seeds, which have flavor and resiliency that we don't have in monoculture,
Right.
the modern breeding programs have resulted in high yields, and that's all that they brag about. And yet if there's any little problem with weather or whatever, they really go down fast.
That's what I think is cool about the regional aspect of heirloom seeds is because they've already have it bred into them for generations, to be pest tolerant, how to handle the climate and everything, which I think is super cool. Because that's like their genetic history that then we can benefit from that's being underappreciated.
Yep.
So.
Okay, so this is something that we talked about with the animals that you just sort of discussed right there. As we have animals on the ground and they evolve over time, they evolve for current conditions, right?
Right.
Do seeds do the same thing, or is it one of those things that we want an heirloom seed from 2,000 years ago? We're going to call it Kamut, and we're going to go from there. We're not going to change it. Or do we let it evolve or encourage it to evolve through selective breeding like we would with an animal? What's your perspective on that?
Well, I think that wherever you plant a seed, there's going to be, if you let them grow year after year in the same region, there's going to be an adaptation to that region. And that's the same all over the world. So if they're there long enough, then if you transplant them across the world, there might be a little bit of a, where are we now? But if it's close enough to an acceptable region, they'll do fine. But if you're really taking them too far out of their element, if it's too hot or too cold, or the days aren't, or the season isn't long enough or something, then they will not succeed. And so one of my main focuses is in finding seeds that really are adaptable to the region rather than forcing them to adapt by modifying them or hybridizing them or whatever. I try to find seeds that are already naturally adaptive, and so that gives you a lot of latitude, but it's not across the board for everything. And I don't worry about that. I just grow what grows best.
You talked about that with us. You gave your potatoes a couple seasons and see how they sit. Remember that little experimental plant you had?
I did started out with 42 varieties of potatoes on dry land to see what would shake out.
Right.
And after about 5 years, I was down to 5.
Okay, so
favorites.
then you do adapt a little bit, but
sure,
not
I
necessarily.
picked varieties that were best adapted.
Okay.
And then, but among those varieties, there's not a lot of change, but there certainly is a little bit of change over the year, a little bit more adaptation. But the major adaptation I was looking for between varieties, I had no idea how they would do on dry land. That's not normally a selective pressure that's used commercially because people in our area, they would irrigate and to get the highest shields because that's all the focus is.
Okay, so would you find, as you are seed sellers, do you find the same thing for people across the country that they keep trying the same kinds of things, or you'll see that your customers will try this kind of thing and then go to the next?
I think, like we have a store in Connecticut and a lot of people would come in and they're like, we've always grown this butternut squash, this is all we want to buy. And I think it was a very traditional thing, for that community, which is great to be honored and to be kept. But at the same point, we were trying to encourage them to branch out a little bit. So when we have our customers come and they want to try something new, usually we, like in our catalog, we don't have zones. And they're like, which is really different because most catalogs have zones, But we try to encourage them to try varieties like for the sunny, humid south, you'll get stuff from Thailand, So, and plus in Thailand, it has to be more pest resistant anyways because there's so many pests. So that's kind of how we direct our customers. And then that way, they're not only getting a new variety to try, they can also try a new cuisine, new recipes. And it's really cool because then some people, like I had a gentleman come in and he's actually crossing like our sugar rush peach pepper with another pepper, and he's developing his own varieties. And that's the beauty of being open pollinated. You have that flexibility too, which is really cool.
Okay, and yet, if it's open pollinated and it starts to change too much, you've lost one of the characteristics of the thing that you wanted to bring over.
Thing,
Yes.
And that's what he was amazed with, was that just selecting that, that he could select it for the flavor he was looking for, like how sweet he wanted it, if he wanted a more fruity flavor or not, which that's like with Brad Gates, with all of his tomatoes, that he works towards, that we also sell. Each one becomes a new thing, which is unique in and of itself, but yet it still has that history, where it originally started from, and that adaptability to the environment as well as, the pest pressures that it has in it.
So we talked to a gentleman that raises sheep in Kansas, and he said he does a Katahdin mix. And the one thing that he likes, not the one thing, many of the things that he likes include things like pest resistance and the tolerance for weather.
Yeah, exactly.
But he said that if you have that Katahdin and it's in a certain specific region and it's pest resistant to one thing, you'll notice there's a little less resistance in 5 years. And so you have to keep mixing. Do seeds do that same kind of thing?
I don't know, for instance, one thing that we had a big deal with was we've never had Japanese beetles in Missouri, ever. And then one summer, we ended up just getting an influx of Japanese beetles like crazy, and they attacked all of our flowers. Like my pear tree out in the yard, it had leaves. At noon, all the leaves were gone. I woke up, leaves on the tree, noon, all the leaves were gone. And that tree, it was so resilient, it leafed out again twice because they came back and ate all the leaves off. Now this summer, we haven't had any issues with them eating the leaves off the trees. So it's like, I think nature has its own cycle, and the seeds develop within that cycle and that rhythm. So while it may become weaker one year, I think then if you continue to just kind of work with the adaptations of it, it'll go ahead and rebound. And that's what I saw like after the Japanese beetles and that sort of thing, that they started to rebound and not be, quite so broken down by that cycle, which is cool. But I also think it's always great to add diversity in. I think that's a really cool part about open pollinated seeds is while you have that history, they've already withstand centuries of, being in drought conditions, pests, nothing's necessarily new under the sun. So they've already been there and done that. So I think that's the cool part about heirlooms, where we don't really know what's going to happen with all the new developed varieties, and making it such a small, like a handful of seed companies that are holding that. So that's why I think it's so important to maintain our open pollinated past. Because if Thomas Jefferson could grow it and I can grow it, well, then it must be pretty hardy, which is pretty cool.
The thing that keeps coming to my mind is that, I don't know if you ever read Jurassic Park, Michael Crichton, and he has a little theory running through that where he talks about life and evolution and change, and how evolution occurs on that perfect margin between enough impetus to encourage organisms to change, but not so much that they can't evolve in time.
Right, exactly.
So we have had evolution over our entire history, but the change has not been quite so intense, that constant boom, 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 especially with globalization and the ability to get a seed from
around the
world to your doorstep in 2 days.
Which I think is, the saying, like, even for people, because I see a lot of life parallels, what's hard makes you stronger. And so I think that is what we see in a lot of, both with farmers, the resilience they want, like I grew up, my dad was a farmer. He had to stop in the 80s because of farming, he couldn't make a living anymore. And so he had to stop, he did something completely different, but then here I am back, doing what my grandparents came over from Germany to do. So so it's like, just like the seeds. You know, we have seen that. That's why Joe started the seed company. He was seeing all these varieties he grew up with his grandma disappearing. So those hard times actually made us stronger to realize what we have and why we need to preserve it.
So one of the things that Bob talked about that it was one of those eye-opening moments for me in the interviews was you talked about the experiment that modern farming is a short-term experiment that's occurred in the last 100 years, but you think it's going to go back to what our grandparents and great-grandparents did maybe, because it's not necessarily the success that we think it is.
Well, my point is when you're talking about conventional agriculture is what we've been doing for 10,000 years. And this last 70 years has been a chemical experiment. And now we're really starting to see some detriments from. We have pesticide or herbicide-resistant weeds, so that the weed killers aren't working as well as they used to. We have residues on our food that no one wants. We have GMOs that are just completely out of control. We have no idea what they are doing to us, and yet they're not even labeled, for heaven's sakes. So we have several things that are propping up an artificial monoculture system that now are starting to prove quite costly. And so I'm always talking about the very high cost of cheap food. And the goal of this country has been cheap food, grown in great abundance, for very little money, not even enough money to pay the farmers. Like Emily was saying, her father couldn't afford to farm. Many of my neighbors can't afford to farm anymore because they can't pay their bills from the little that they receive from their crops. So this is what's the problem. This is a backwards situation. And what we need to do, in my mind, is reconnect food and health so that we have a reason for people to pay more because they have a higher value. So we grow not commodities. Emily doesn't sell commodity seeds. Right. She sells heirloom seeds that are full of flavor and taste, and flavors are very strongly linked to health aspects. The polyphenols that are very strong antioxidants and contribute to anti-inflammatory properties are related to flavors and taste. So the better something tastes and the better flavor and aroma it has, the more it's probably going to be healthy for you.
Now I am so glad you brought up the cost, because that's a big thing that both of you have really figured out. You know, niche marketing is a huge thing in heirloom seeds, in something that has a higher dollar value, that you're trying to find your market. It's kind of one of the only ways you can do it if you're going to compete with the large scale agriculture.
Stuff, yeah.
So you both have found a way to make your products commercially viable, correct?
And I think the products speak for themselves, and that if you go buy a tomato off of the shelf of the grocery store, it doesn't taste like anything. Whereas if you grow your own tomato or you have an heirloom tomato you get from the farmer's market, it's going to make people want to come back and buy it because it has so much more flavor. And part of the reason, that they bred those tomatoes to be hard, not have much flavor, was so that they could ship it across the country. But when you do that, you lose all the vitamins and the benefits. And so for me, I'd much rather go get a tomato out of my garden or from the farmer's market and support the local farmer and actually have something that is nourishing myself. Because why should I pay, crazy doctor bills to try to, get back the nutrition that I am lacking? I'm actually not even feeding myself. I'm just feeling full, because I don't even have the vitamins that our grandparents were enjoying. And you can see that in America, the health statistics, how our country is falling as far as, we have an obesity epidemic, because people just keep trying to feed themselves with processed food, but there's no nutrition in it. So you can see the change.
So now this market that's coming up, the 30 and under, it's my understanding there's something like 25 to 30% of our buying market is going to be that demographic. I think that's what this number that was tossed around. They are in search for meaning. That's my understanding. Oh, yeah. So they put a different value on food, on work, on what they make, what a living means. Right. I'll take less money because I can be home for my kid's softball game kind of thing. So is it going to be easier to get people to understand, for both of you, why it might cost a little more for Kamut, but it's worth it? Why it might cost a little more for an heirloom seed, but the taste is worth it. There is a meaning and a value to that extra dollar you spend. Right. Is that an easier thing to sell to this market?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, a lot of our customers, they're searching for meaning, like you say, and they're tired of corporate agriculture. They're tired of working at corporations. They're just tired of the system, and they want to get out in the country. We get so many people moving from LA and from New York, and they're actually coming to the Midwest because they can sell their property there, buy a whole bunch more land, and start a farm. And they want that because it teaches their kids where their food comes from. They've got their own food in their backyard. They know what's on it, and just that whole lifestyle. I think people are missing that so much, and that's easy to sell.
I think if they're allowed to taste things, we have a cantaloupe grower in our neighborhood that raises cantaloupes right along the Missouri River, and he brings them into town. So they're only available about 5 or 6 weeks is the window. People wait all year for that. And the cantaloupes are 3 times what the hard green cantaloupes in California are. No one even looks at the California cantaloupes when the Montana fresh ones, and you smell them when you walk in the store. So you don't have to advertise.
No, you don't. You can smell them driving by on the road.
And you can smell them, and people just gobble them up. They taste in the Great Falls, which is the nearest big town to us, and people will chase the pickup down the street to get him to stop because it's just loaded for cantaloupes in the back to buy those cantaloupes. You can't even get to the farmer's market before half the pickup is sold out because people know it and appreciate it. This is just the tip of the iceberg that we can really capitalize on. We don't, and that one's easy because you can smell it and taste it immediately.
Yeah.
For the kamut, I mean, we have to put it in a form that people can appreciate because they're not going to run down the street after a sack of grain.
Yeah.
You can't smell it. You can't taste it. Well, you have to eat it to taste it, but to have aroma of fresh bread or something like that made with it, then that's where we get our marketing advantage. But that's not as easy to sell as a fresh peach or something that you can see and smell right in front of you. So this is the key, I think, to let people and educate them that not only does the food taste good, but it also is healthy for you. And if we're raising without chemicals too, for avoiding residues, then we're removing another source of deterioration. And more, I'm sure more and more your customers and more the gardens are using less chemicals.
Yes.
And it's not the thing that we say, well, it's organic or nothing. No, we don't say that. We say, this is the direction. And the more we can go down this road, the better off we're going to be. But we're not trying to be purists or say have to do everything absolutely, pure. But we want to change the direction we're going and go away from where we have been going, which is a detriment to ourselves and our children, our grandchildren, to something that's going to be a source of vitality and health for them and enjoyment.
A lot of people ask me, how do I get started? They come to our farm and they see acres of all these vegetables in our trial gardens. How do I start? How do I do what you're doing? And I say, if you live in the city, put a basil plant on your fire escape. Start small.
Yes.
You don't have to have acres to make this your lifestyle. Buy a bag of kamut, make your own bread, make some waffles, whatever. Just start there, and then it starts to mushroom, and it grows, and you gain the skills you need. Because it didn't happen overnight, it's a journey, and that's the beautiful part.
Yep. One dish, one plant at a time.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, so I know you've got to prep to go speak. So
we're going to be speaking a little bit. We're really thrilled to be here. Heirloom Expo, National Heirloom Expo. This is about the 5th or 6th time that I've been here.
You're getting good at this.
And I love it. Yes.
Well, his publicist, I think, is saying, we got a book. Green book goes,
oh, yeah.
There's, show me what you're doing here.
Awesome.
And I've got my daughter here and my granddaughter helping us with selling of our vegetable oil that we grow on the farm and crush on the farm. We make the roasted kamut snacks with it. And since they only gave me 10 minutes on my panel.
Hi.
Hello.
We are here at the Heirloom Expo in Santa Rosa. If you would introduce yourself and tell me what you're doing here.
Okay, my name is Kathleen. My YouTube channel is Mama Grows. I'm a suburban backyard homesteader where I try as much as I can to grow as many vegetables and fruits and all sorts of things. I have chickens and I also raise my own meat. We do meat rabbits. So we do a standard size Rex rabbit. And that has replaced all of our white meat consumption. One rabbit will give us 5 meals because you appreciate when you raise your own, you appreciate it so much more. And
Okay, so now that seems like a funny thing because rabbits are these soft, cute, fuzzy little things, but rabbit meat is becoming known as one of the more more sustainable meats out there, correct?
Oh, totally correct. They can live 90% off of grass, and then you can supplement with minerals and their pellet feed. But 90% off of grass. You move them on tractors on your suburban lawn. It's really quite cool. I can pick tree trimmings, weeds. They eat a lot. There are some that are not good for them, just like any animal. Yep. But I can forage on my little 1/4 acre property. During the growing season, I don't feed them, and they reproduce. You know, a lot of people will do the broiler chicks, the Cornish cross, where they're depending upon another source to send them something that can no longer reproduce on its own.
Yes.
Rabbits, every 30 days, you could breed them again.
Whether you like it or not.
Right. So while I'm gone, my rabbit is supposed to have babies while I'm gone. So I raise them in a colony style setup so that they're on the ground, they can dig, they have a lot more space than in cages. The buck gets to live with the does while I allow him to, but sustainable. So in theory, 2 does and a buck can give you, I forget the amount, like 300 pounds of meat or something.
So the interesting thing about rabbits too is that you can do self-contained feed in one area, right? If you need to just do a bag of feed, you can do it and raise them in a smaller area, so you don't need acres and acres.
Nope. There are a lot of people, and I forget their channel names, but they raise them in their garage, or in the winter I'll put them in my greenhouse, so it's nice and comfortable for me to go take care of their chores.
Yes.
You can do it as small or as big as you want.
Hi, we're here at the Heirloom Expo in Santa Rosa. Please introduce yourself. Tell me what you're doing here.
So I'm Ken Green, and I, many years ago, founded the first seed library in the country, and wound up quitting.
The very first seed library?
Yeah,
Wow.
I wound up quitting my job, and my partner quit his job, and we started a seed farm, and we turned it into the Hudson Valley Seed Company. And so that's what we've been doing for the last 14 years or so now. Yeah.
So in the beginning, was that one of those decisions, like being a musician, you're going to say, we're going to do this whether we can retire at 80 or not?
Yeah. You know, I was full-time at the library, and then I started the seed library, and I was like, oh, I need a little bit more time with the seeds. So I asked them if I could go down to 4 days, and they were like, okay. And then I needed to go down to 3 days, and then 2. And then finally I was just like 1 day a week at the library. All the rest of my time with seeds. I was like, maybe it's time to make the leap and just be with the seeds and see what happens. Yeah.
So why do you call it a library?
Well, so I worked at a public library.
Yes.
And so the idea was that I added seeds to the library catalog, because seeds come with stories. They come with cultural stories, romantic stories, spiritual stories, myths, tall tales, travel. And so I wanted people to think about the stories that are passed with the seeds just as much as the genetics. And so if you check out a seed from a seed library, then you bring it home. And the way libraries work is you have to bring the story back. So saving seeds from the plants and bringing them back to the library to share with the rest of the community. And there's over 400 seed libraries all over the country now. And at this event, we have our annual National Seed Librarian Summit, where we all get together and talk. But, you know, for me, I turned it into a seed company. And so, you know, people can buy seeds from us, and you don't have to return seeds to get seeds from us.
But this is one of the problems with doing something that has a great value to it that might not be a monetary value. Mm-hmm. You have to make it economically viable.
Yes.
And you've succeeded in doing that. And
most of the time.
Well, but this is not unusual in agriculture. If you're going to raise a heritage animal or an heirloom seed or an heirloom vegetable, you have to. It can either be a labor of love, you lose your shirt, and then you can't do it in the long run.
Well, and
it's
I
like
think
filmmaking.
Yeah. Well, I think a big part of it also is awareness.
Yes.
That most people, when they're looking at eating something,
yes.
You know, we have sort of a farm-to-table consciousness, but people don't think back that step just before that. So with seeds, it's, well, you know, we're saying, where does food come from? Who grows the food? How do they grow the food? But we're not necessarily saying, well, where did those seeds come from that grew the food? How are those seeds grown? Who is caring for them? How are they growing them? And how does that change what's available to me? And what sort of ripple effect does that have on the food system?
Yes.
And so seeds are the foundation of our food system, but they're pretty invisible to most people. And so the idea of all this diversity that we're losing, so loss of genetic diversity, is really because of lack of transparency in the food system. So if we don't know where our food comes from and where our seeds come from and what that means, then whoever's controlling that, which happens to be large corporations for the most part, are narrowing what our choices are, which is narrowing the diversity of what's available to us. So for us as a seed company, we're all about bringing that diversity back. And I'm sure you've experienced this with your work with heritage animals, there's a huge educational piece.
Oh, that's the biggest part of it.
Yeah.
Because people have kind of label fatigue or sticker shock, whatever you like to call it. They know, okay, it's non-GMO, and they know it has a label on it that says cruelty-free and pasture-based and, you know, organic. And yet nowhere do they talk about the breed.
Mm-hmm. Right.
In the terms
the
of
breed,
an animal.
or the variety.
Variety.
Yes.
Nowhere.
People
And
think broccoli,
it's
and that's like
broccoli.
as far as they go.
That's exactly
And it's
it.
like, well, if we were thinking about the varieties, then you'd be thinking about diversity.
Yes.
And you'd be thinking about the impact of your food choices. So what we do is, so you can see that our seed packs don't look like a regular seed pack,
No, they do not.
right? And they also don't work like a regular seed pack. When you open it up, you take this sticker off.
Now I'm going to have to buy this, you know
No,
that, right?
you don't.
No, I really will have to
No.
buy this. And 4
No.
others just because, right?
I can put it all
This
back
is a marital
together.
issue for me. He's standing right there.
So that's what the seed pack looks like when it opens
It
it
looks
up.
like a young adult novel or a Madeline L'Engle
And
book
then
or
there's a
something.
whole story inside.
Oh, look at that. Okay.
So what-
Tulsi, considered a sacred plant in the Hindu religion, has been cultivated for at least 3,000 years, and on and on.
Yes.
Wow.
So the idea behind this was the educational piece. When people see our seed pack, we want them to do a double take, and think, there's something different is happening here. So I work with artists. Every single seed pack is by a different artist. I tell the artist the story of the seed, whatever that story is, and then the artist interprets that story through the artwork. They're telling the story, and then a little piece of that story is inside, so that we can start to change the culture around food and around the choices that we have.
Yes.
And bring this diversity back.
Yeah, and I don't think people really understand the
So I'm Joseph Lofthouse. I'm a sustenance farmer from Paradise, Utah.
what does sustenance farmer mean?
So it means I grow the food that I eat, and that's the primary focus of my farming, is to feed myself and my loved ones.
Okay.
And I sell a little bit at the farmer's market, but mostly just for gas money.
Okay, fantastic. And you're here in Santa Rosa, you're a speaker.
Yes.
Okay, so tell me what you were speaking
So what I'm most known for is promoting promiscuous pollination.
about. That sounds a little racy.
Well, another name we use for it is a landrace, that is allowing genetically diverse crops to grow in an area long enough that they become adapted to the farmer, to the climate, to the insects.
Oh, now that was the interesting thing that I caught in your talk, that I loved your definition of landrace, because that applies with animals too. So give me that concise definition again that you used. It was wonderful.
So the definition that I use is a landrace is a genetically diverse crop that is locally adapted.
So plants or animals.
Yeah, plants or animals. It's grown in one place long enough that it knows how to deal with the ecosystem, the farmer, the bugs, the climate, the soil, but genetic diversity is a key to growing a landrace. Because if I grow an heirloom tomato, it's going to be adapted to a land far away in a time far away, and not to current conditions. But if I allow the genetics to shift from year to year, then they can adapt to my local growing conditions.
So that the example that immediately comes to mind on the animal side is the Spanish cattle that came to Florida. They adapted there and became the Florida crackers. So the cattle there were pest resistant to the pests in Florida and heat tolerant, and they basically made it or not. And as the cattle moved across to Texas, it sort of morphs into the Longhorn.
Ah.
And it's a very different environment and ecosystem, correct?
Yes, but they both came out of the same genetically diverse ancestors.
That same Spanish line is where it initially came and then continues on. So how long is just long enough for it to adapt? It doesn't matter if it's 2 years or 200 years, do you think?
Well, I don't care. If a variety is genetically diverse and it grows really well in my variety or in my farm, and my community loves it,
it's officially adapted.
I say it's a landrace.
Yeah.
It's adapted.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But about 3 years, I think, is the magic time frame, because by then you've learned to be a better farmer, the plants learned what you like, and you're sort of all meshing, and from 3 years on with like promiscuously pollinating plants, it does really well. Some of the inbreeders are harder, like garlic is a clone, and how do you adapt locally for a clone?
Well, I'm assuming you just have varieties that make it or don't.
Well, yeah, you could plant 100 clones and some of them would work and some wouldn't, but they're not really changing with the changing ecosystem.
Yeah, just over. That's the one that makes it or not. Okay, so how do you have a difficult time with things like pollination coming in on the wind from plants that are not locally adapted, or does it not make a difference at some point to you?
Well, I don't care, because what I'm looking for is I'm looking for good taste. I don't care if my squash is, what color it is. It can be green or red or orange or whatever. And that doesn't affect how it tastes to me in the kitchen. And so I don't care. I don't care what leaf shapes are. And so a lot of that stuff that blows in on the wind is going to be a great variety, because we've had 10,000 years of domestication to get rid of all the poisons. And
so in a way, you are completely about it either makes it or it doesn't. If it produces an efficient and effective, it stays.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful. Fantastic. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This has been great.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
I'm glad you came all the way out from Paradise, Utah.
Paradise, Utah.
Yeah. All right. That's on our list of Utah's on our list of places we love. So
wow.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous state. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming to the Heirloom Seed Expo.
Thank you. Okay, so we are at the Heirloom Expo here. We're stopping for lunch. Tell us what you make here at this booth and who you are.
I'm Chef Mateo Silverman, chef and owner of Chalk Hill Cookery in Windsor, California, in Sonoma County. And we do all plant-based vegan food. Everything's 100% vegan, based on like the local and seasonal harvests, and then we incorporate other organic ingredients into our food. So some of our highlights are like a pastrami maitake Reuben wrap. It's a play on traditional Reuben. Instead of the pastrami, we're using maitake mushroom spiced up like that.
Okay, I have to say, I'm really looking forward to just going to come out of that, because I'm usually a fairly typical food kind of girl, so I'm a little nervous as to what foods might come out of a kitchen that has all vegan and alternate things. But I looked on that plate, and it looks really good.
Yeah.
So how different do the foods taste when they're made with vegan things in a creative way?
Well, it's not that it's tasting different. Food brings up a lot of memories in people's lives, so aside from textures and flavors that people seem to miss, it's more about bringing up those happy memories in people. So this dish here is our version of lox and bagels. So it's a gluten-free bagel, and on top we put our house-made cashew cream cheese, and instead of smoked salmon, we slowly roast and then smoke carrots, and then we marinate them so that takes the place of the smoked salmon.
That really looks
bagel
tasty.
And lox. It's fantastic. It's one of our best sellers at this expo.
And am I seeing flowers in there too?
Yeah, a friend and farmer at the Sebastopol Farmers Market, George, he owns Earthworker Farm, and he grows all these microgreens and flowers.
Fantastic. Well, I am very much looking forward to lunch.
All right, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thanks very
Appreciate
much.
it.
My name is Natalie. I work with Harvest and Mill Organic Clothing. We're an organic clothing company. We use 100% organic cotton. All the cotton is grown in the United States. We have it completely milled in the United States, and then sew everything locally in Oakland, San Francisco, and Berkeley. We focus on undyed cotton. So the clothing process can be highly toxic. When fabric is finished, there are all sorts of chemicals put on the finished fabric. There can be formaldehyde, There can be all kinds of heavy metals. Unlike food, clothing does not have rigorous labeling laws.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't really think about it.
Yeah, so when you buy food, there has to be all the ingredients listed. When you buy clothing, it's very minimal. So what we have here is 100% organic cotton. We have undyed white cotton. This is the natural color of white cotton, so it's undyed and unbleached. It's a bit creamier than a bleached cotton, but this is the natural color of white cotton. This here is an heirloom variety of brown cotton.
Oh, how cool is that?
So cotton, like our food crops, has been largely bred for commercial purposes. So you mostly see white cotton, and that's because in commercial clothing making, white cotton is the easiest to dye. However, the dyeing process is super toxic. So these older heirloom varieties of cotton are really valuable because you don't have to dye them.
So the ones that we're seeing that are the brown sweats here and the brown shirts, that's just the natural color that comes from that cotton?
0 dyes on these.
That's beautiful. I mean, that's a gorgeous color.
And 0 dyes on this. This is a green cotton. So
Yeah.
this is the color of the cotton there.
Yeah, I was fondling the socks because I'm a sock girl. Boy, does that feel good. It really does.
They're super comfy.
They do feel really, really nice. Because that's next to your skin the whole time. You think about it. You don't, it has to feel good or I start to break out into hives, and natural fabrics are really important. But I'm assuming that natural fabrics that haven't been treated are just that much more pure feeling on your skin.
Exactly. Those finishing chemicals are a big deal. And we as consumers are just starting to wake up to that fact. The fashion industry and the food industry are actually very deeply connected. Our food and fiber come from the same systems, but the fashion industry is easily 20 years behind the food industry. So people are starting to wake up to it now, but we still have a lot of work to do in terms of consumer awareness. So as what you were saying, the skin is the largest organ on our body.
Yes.
We readily absorb chemicals through our skin. So it's really important the textiles we have next to our skin, and we have textiles next to our skin almost 24 hours a day. Sheets, towels, clothing, underwear. It's really important to keep that as clean as possible.
So it's kind of one of my main goals in life is to go back to those sheets. You know, the sheets that your grandmother had and that they just feel differently. They're kind of a little stiffer, a little...
Sure.
I think it's a different weave that goes into some of those, but I kind of wonder if we go back to the old feeling fabrics, if it wouldn't just be a nicer thing altogether for our skin if you just feel more basic somehow.
Sure, if you think about it, 50 years ago before the petrochemical, or more like 70 years ago before the petrochemical revolution, clothing was way less treated. You know, the cotton itself was much cleaner. There wasn't any polyester in there. Nowadays you get clothing, there's a lot of plastic on our clothing. It's in the polyester thread in the actual fabric. It's in the polyester thread that sews the clothing together. And then there's petrochemicals on the actual dyes. A lot of commercial dyes are made with oil-based chemicals. And we're wearing that next to our skin. You know, wearing polyester can be really detrimental both to our health and to the health of the planet.
It makes me break out in hives. I have a hard time with the whole concept in general. It just feels completely foreign.
For sure.
Yeah.
And the other thing is there's a second time we can interact with our fabric. So when we wash our fabric, when we wash our clothing, little bits of those chemicals from the dyes and also from the polyester microplastics, they wash out of the wash and they go into our local water supply. So there's been found to be about 72 toxic chemicals that are banned in the USA and in the EU that we're finding in our water supply. Greenpeace recently did a big report about this. They call it Dirty Laundry, where they're finding these chemicals that are banned here. But what we're doing is importing these chemicals from Asia, where a lot of garments are sewn and dyed. We're bringing them here, we're washing our clothing, and we're getting it into our water supply. Then we're drinking it, and we're eating it.
Interesting.
So
Gets
it's
there one way or another, yeah.
It's the microplastics, it's the chemicals from finishing, and the agricultural chemicals.
Yeah. So, okay, now I'm looking at this one here, this kind of almost yellow shirt. How did they get that color?
This is dyed with clay. So clay dyeing and mud dyeing, dirt dyeing it's also called, has been done around the world for as long as we know. There's, a famous red shirt from Hawaii. You can get mud cloths from the continent of Africa. There's a really ancient dyeing technique. So this shirt right here is dyed with nothing but earth from California. This artist, her name is Rosa Novak. She's a local ceramicist based in Oakland, and she works with local clays. So she collects this clay from an eroded hillside down by Half Moon Bay, and she just soaks the shirts in the clay for a couple days. And because there's some metals and iron in the dirt, it acts as a mordant and makes this color fast.
So when I was younger, all the surfer guys would wear these T-shirts, and they would get a little bit beat up in the sun. They'd be good cotton, but it's that beautiful, beautiful. I've worn this 42,000 times and washed it. It started out as good cotton, but it's this beautiful, just a soft shade of beat up old T-shirt, and it looked like the most comfortable thing on the planet. This is obviously not a beat up thing, but that color is just such a soft, soft, soft tan yellow. It's a beautiful, it has that same look to it. It's just been in the sun and loved, and that's beautiful.
People are so attracted to natural color.
Yes.
Our eyes are very accustomed to seeing fabricated colors, but this is 100% natural color, and people are so drawn to it.
Yeah,
they really love it.
Gorgeous. Okay, so you do different shirts and socks and T-shirts.
We do pants. We do lounge pants. Super comfy, 100% organic cotton pants.
Fantastic.
We do socks.
Baby onesies and...
Yeah, kiddo stuff. We do a variety of things.
Wonderful. And bags and all kinds of things. So if somebody wants to find this company, where do they go?
They go to harvestandmill.com. There, or check us out on Instagram, handle Harvest and Mill, or Facebook.
Wonderful. Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate you.
If you liked our podcast, please subscribe. This is how we keep going. And please tell your friends to join us. Please feel free to post any questions or comments that you might have to our social media sites. Our Twitter feed is at Backyard Green Films, spelled BKYRDGREENFILMS. Our Instagram is at Backyard Green Films, BACKYARDGREENFILMS. Our Facebook is Backyard Green Films. Our YouTube URL is youtube.com/backyardgreentv.
We want to thank everyone at the Heirloom Expo this week in Santa Rosa who spoke with us, especially Bob Quinn and Emily from Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds. To find out more about the Heirloom Expo, please go to theheirloomexpo.com. You have been listening to Agri-Culture with your host, Alara Bowman. Please tune in for more upcoming episodes from our travels. We'd also like to thank our producer, Michelle Council. I'm Rick Bowman, your behind-the-scenes editor. Until next time. This has been a presentation of Backyard Green Films Productions, all rights reserved, copyright 2019.